Australia is a pretty enormous place. Imagine trying to get around it without a plane. Well, for a long time that was a thing. Until these guys, Hudson Fysh and Paul McGuinness, had a thought while travelling across the Queensland outback. Gosh, Australia is a big place.
Tell me about it.
Hey, why don't we, instead of driving, carry mail, cargo, even people by aeroplane?
Gee, that's a cracker of an idea.
It sure was, but back then in 1919, planes were still fairly new. In fact, most people were pretty terrified of the idea of a big hunk of metal soaring through the sky, but not Fysh and McGuinness. They had both flown planes during the First World War and thought that maybe they could be used to deliver mail and people from A to B. A year later, on the 16th of November 1920, they founded the Queensland and Northern Territory Aerial Services, or Qantas. There were doubters, like the postmaster at the time.
Airmail? That'll never work.
But a few months later, Qantas took off on its first ever mail and passenger flight from Charleville to Cloncurry. This guy, Alexander Kennedy, was their first ever passenger, and when they were soaring through the sky, yelled, "Be damned to the doubters!" Over the next several years, Qantas really started to soar. The planes got improvements, including one with a toilet, and they started making longer trips. Not to the toilet. In 1934, Qantas teamed up with Britain's Imperial Airlines for their first international flight. 15 passengers travelled from Darwin to the UK in just 9 days with only 36 stopovers, which apparently was impressive at the time. After the Second World War, the government bought Qantas and created a domestic airline called TAA. The other main airline was Ansett, and for the next few decades, if you were flying in Australia, chances are you'd either be on one or the other. In fact, they were the only two airlines allowed to fly between capital cities. And they were busy. More and more people took to the sky as flying got quicker, cheaper, and safer. In fact, Qantas was famous for its lack of major accidents.
Well, Qantas never crashed.
In the 90s, the government decided to sell Qantas and let other airlines join the mix. But the competition was too much for Ansett, which shut up shop for good in 2002. Since then, the airline industry's seen its ups and downs, and right now, it's definitely down. COVID-19 has made it really hard for airlines to stay aloft, and many workers have been stood down or lost their jobs. Earlier this year, Virgin announced it couldn't pay its debts. It was sold to new owners, and while it's still in business, it'll have to make some changes. As for Qantas, while it hasn't been the best year, last week was a time to celebrate. And while we don't know what the future will hold, the Flying Kangaroo has cemented its place in Aussie aviation history.